get that week and what I learned about how fragile, how tenuous the commitment of the society to its basic values often is, and how easy it is to panic people into betraying them. And I'll stay with this trope, if you don't mind, because I think it's back, and I think the rot is spreading. And I think it began this present phase about exactly 5 years ago, when a small newspaper in the Jutland area of Denmark, called Jyllands-Posten, published some, you'll know about this, some cartoons, better to say caricatures actually, of the figure of the Prophet Muhammad, who it's wrongly thought cannot ever be represented in art. There are several Islamic representations of him, particularly in Persian culture, oddly enough. It's not a prohibition that is of any great value or of any great force, though it's believed to be by people who like to find cultural reasons, as they often do, for political cowardice and moral cowardice. At any rate, you know the sequel. There was an organized attempt to destroy the Danish economy by boycott, coordinated by some very extreme mullahs in Denmark with some partners of theirs in other countries. There was an open season on Danish people, many of whom were attacked in other countries. By the end of it, we think at least 300 people were killed, and not all of them Danish, in different countries. There were riots between Muslims and Christians in Nigeria, in countries where demonstrations are never normally allowed at all and where the police control everything, such as Syria. Large crowds were allowed to burn down the Danish embassy without any apparent police intervention. The thing had every appearance of a horrible orchestration. I thought, well, here again, what could be a clearer case? Here is a small Scandinavian democracy which had a fairly heroic record of resistance to Nazism. Its citizens are peaceful. Its government is not allowed by law to censor the press. The demand was that the government close that paper and apologize for its publication. The Danish Prime Minister said, I can't do that. I have no right in law to affect the publication of cartoons or articles in Denmark. But at least the Friends of Denmark will show their faces now, and we'll have a proper discussion about this full frontal challenge to the values of the First Amendment. Can't wait to see, for example, what the State Department will say. The Bush State Department, here's a chance for it to really stick out its chest and testify for real values. Well, the Bush State Department made a statement saying, we're very sorry about any offense caused by the Danish cartoons. Now, we don't keep a State Department going to comment on the internal affairs of Danish journalism. The State Department could reasonably have said that wasn't its job. Its job is to say we stand by our democratic allies, and we particularly feel appalled at the violation of its diplomatic immunity and the sovereign protection of its diplomat. Couldn't even go that far. The first thing was to apologize. Well, that's bad, but I'm not a diplomat. I live in Washington, but I'm not a politician. I'm a journalist. I thought, well, my profession, my great profession, will stick up on this point, and we'll have a proper discussion. And the first thing is to show the cartoons, because people must see what the fuss is about. I mean, if we don't live now in the age of the image, where do we live? Everything is image-driven. Newspapers, magazines, and of course the television. Everything is to do with the pictures themselves, the ipsissima. Not one outlet in the United States would publish or show those cartoons. Not one network, not one national newspaper, not one news magazine. I couldn't even get them on in my column in Slate, which is online, though you could in the end go by link to find them, but the magazine itself wouldn't take responsibility to do it. A small magazine I work for, Skeptical, it's called the Skeptical Inquirer, secular magazine. It's not called Skeptical Magazine, it's called Free Inquiry. Pardon me, there are two I work for. Free Inquiry did publish them. I don't know if our circulation is even in 5 figures, but the bookstore chains immediately pulled all copies of our magazine from the shelves. And this was in response to no threat. It was in response to no pressure. It was in response to no danger at all. It's what, when I was a kid, we would say was crying before you were hurt. But I thought then, and I think now, it was a terrible capitulation. There wasn't anyone in the United States who would say, look, first order of business, let's see what the fuss is about. What do these pictures really look like? No one would take that responsibility. And nobody said it was for any other reason than fear. I know these people. I know these editors. I work for some of them. Why didn't you do it? What were we afraid of? We were afraid of reprisal. Well, of what value is your First Amendment? Of what value is the enormous money that you make out of free expression? The giant revenues that are to be made in a country that enjoys the right of free publication, if it won't be defended at the very first challenge. You think it can't get worse? Yes, it can. Yale University Press, which is run by someone who used to be a publisher of mine but won't ever be again, called John Donachich, decides to commission a book by a Danish scholar on the Danish cartoons, a learned treatment of the subject, including the vexed question of, is there permissible representation of the Prophet Muhammad in Islamic art? Nicely produced book comes out, Yale University Press, the University of Nathan Hale, the man who said, give me liberty or give me death. And then at the last minute they decide to cut out all the illustrations in the book, all of them, not just the cartoons, no illustration of any kind. Yale University Press, without a shot being fired, says, no, we're not going to do it. We don't have the guts for it. They even issued a statement saying that they felt if they did do so, they would be instigating violence. Now, another thing that depressed me at that point, separate question, is it's a pity that at the University Press of a great university, the proofreaders don't know the meaning of the word instigate. To instigate something is to try and make it happen. It's equivalent to saying incitement. It's saying you're trying to stir something up. It is your aim that there be violence if you instigate it. In the passive use of the word, they made themselves responsible for any action taken of a criminal nature, criminally violent nature, by the publication of the book, which has two bad effects. One, it runs away and it deprives the readers, as well as the author of the book, of the right to discuss the matter freely. And second, in advance it excuses the criminal activity because, after all, it can't be their fault. It's ours for showing the pictures. It's ours for printing the book. It's ours for having Salman as an author in our midst. It's our fault. And so there's an indemnity given in advance to the men of violence. That's therefore a double insult, if you like, to the principles of civilization. And it goes on. You'll probably remember on New Year's Eve, we were preoccupied at that point by the so-called Christmas bomber who nearly brought down a full civilian aircraft from Amsterdam over the city of Detroit. But a few nights later, on New Year's Eve, one of the authors of one of those cartoons, a man called Kurt Westergaard, a 79-year-old man, who was having a sleepover with his granddaughter in Copenhagen, one of the quietest, calmest, sweetest towns you can ever hope to see, has his door broken in with an axe by a wanted Somali gangster who's come to kill him and his granddaughter with an axe on New Year's Eve. And if he hadn't managed to lock himself in the bathroom and press a panic button, they'd both be dead. And Mr. Westergaard, you'll be interested to hear, has since been let go by his magazine as someone who it's too much trouble to keep on the staff. It's just happened a couple of weeks ago. It's all very well to stick up for free speech, but there are limits. And you can't have someone embarrassing you by having his granddaughter and himself attacked on New Year's Eve. It gets around. You look bad. You think it couldn't happen here? Well, I've already told you it could and has with the cartoon case. And then, I hope it won't have escaped your attention that last week, the channel on American television that above all prides itself on saying that the answer to the question, is nothing sacred, is always no. Where there is no cow that cannot be smacked around and abused, Comedy Central decided that discretion was by far the better part of valor, and of all things to cave in on, and of all the examples we could set to the smart and wised up American youth who like to watch it, South Park is told you can't make a teddy bear joke involving the Prophet Muhammad. And so Irreverence Central, No Holds Barred Central, gives in without a fight, or let's say not without a fight. Let's give them some credit. There is one nutcase who has one website in New York who posted a picture on his website of what happened to Theo van Gogh, the Dutch filmmaker, who made a film about the oppression of Muslim women in the city of Amsterdam, and who was ritually murdered in the street, having been shot off his bicycle. He was gutted like a sheep in the roadway, and a knife plunged into his heart which held attached to it a letter, an open letter, to another good friend of mine, Miss Ayaan Hirsi Ali, whose wonderful new book, Nomad, is about to be published, telling her, as an elected member of the Dutch Parliament and a refugee from Somalia and from genital mutilation and from forced marriage and from sectarian warfare and religious theocratic oppression, that she was next. And she now lives in this country, and I can't even tell you where anymore, because she too, like so many of my friends now in Europe and the United States, has to go around with a permanent bodyguard. Whereas the people who put Theo van Gogh's picture on their website and say to the makers of Comedy Central, this is going to happen to you, signed revolutionmuslim.com, don't appear to feel any kind of fear at all. They seem to feel, as perhaps they are, that the First Amendment protects them too. Well, if it does, and if this great architecture of free speech, if this constitutional roof under which we've all been thriving so proudly for so long is to mean anything, then we're going to have to say revolution.com cannot close down an American cable channel at whim by making a little bit of a threat. So the question comes right back to where I suppose I initiated it, which is, it's no longer a hypothetical one. You're not being asked, what would you do when the climate of fear began to spread, and when even people you thought to be reliable and brave will remember urgent appointments elsewhere and say, well, perhaps this particular meeting I could skip, or maybe that petition isn't so vitally important. After all, I've signed so many petitions in my time, I can miss one. And anyway, Captain Alfred Dreyfus always looked a bit of a seedy character to me, rather suspicious-looking type. You know, maybe we should pick our fights with more care. You can feel the air, the atmosphere thickening with excuses and with euphemisms. No, the question is, what are you going to do about this? What are you going to do about it? Now, if what I was just told is true, the ranks of this very hall this evening were thinned, not by the prospect of having myself instead of Sherman Alexie, forbidding enough as it is, but by a fizzled nothing of a bomb in Times Square. Look, you are the children of a revolution. The United States did have to go through a great deal to erect this architecture of constitutional freedom and protection. People in living memory died to register to vote, to be able to hold a public meeting, to be able to assert their most basic and elementary rights. And we celebrate them every year, and we all wish we could have been there, and we weren't. But we can be, because there'll always be a time, a rendezvous with this question, and everyone's going to measure themselves, as Arthur Miller did, by how they shape up to it. So I can now, if I haven't made my point by now, I'm not going to have made it, am I?